So good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. One more time. We hope that you and your families are all well in these prolonged and unprecedented times. On behalf of Pulsar team and the WorldBank, and despite the ongoing circumstances, we are happy to welcome you to our first regional Europe and Central Asia public official workshop entitled Financial Reporting and Debt and Investment Transparency. The main objective of this event get together on the same table government officials, World Bank experts and authorities, and representatives from other international organizations. Present and discuss the results of the Regional Debt and Investment Transparency Survey, analyze key challenges and opportunity of improving debt and investment reporting and transparency processes and practices among European and Central Asia governments. Finally, produce, as a result of the workshop, a set of concrete actions and recommendations which could be carried forward by the government and international financial institutions. In order to achieve the proposed objectives, today we are going to have an extraordinary panel of experts. The opening remarks will be delivered by Lalita Murthy, Europe and Central Asia Regional Director for Equitable Growth, Finance and Institutions from the World Bank, and Daniel Boyce, Governance Practice Managers for ECA East Region, also from the World Bank. Following opening remarks, we will have Dorothy Donland, Practice Manager for Global Macroeconomics and Debt Unit from the World Bank, who will share with us her insights on global trends and debt transparency. Later, Svetlana Klemenko, Lead Financial Management Specialist, will present survey findings and proposed actions. After Svetlana's presentation, we are going to have a roundtable discussion on country insight on debt and investment recording, reporting, and transparency among governments, representative, and subject matter experts. For that, we are delighted to have with us Dritan Fino, Director for Harmonization of Financial Management, Control and Accounting from Ministry of Finance, Economy of Albania. He will be jointly presenting Albanian experience with Tijana Halili, General Director of Public Debt and Foreign Aid Coordination, also from Ministry of Finance and Economy of Albania. Arturo Hambardzumian, Head of Strategy and Risk Management Division from Public Debt Management Department at Ministry of Finance in Republic of Armenia. Zhentai Tentimishev, Head of Public Debt Management Division at Ministry of Finance of Kyrgyz Republic, jointly with Rashat Saltakulova, Specialist of Unit of Statistics of Public Debt from Ministry of Finance, also of Kyrgyz Republic. We also have participation of Efis Ruka, Senior Economist from Economics and Debt Statistics Unit, also known as DEC, who will facilitate the discussion in her capacity of a World Bank subject matter expert. The session will be moderated by Arman Batyan, Lead Financial Management Specialist and Pulsar Program Manager at the World Bank. During the final part of the session, we will have with us Jan Karutzer, IPSA's Board Chair, who will share with us his thoughts on how international public sector accounting standards can increase transparency. And Robi Sinderovic, Governance Practice Manager for ECA West Region, will also present the challenges and next steps of financial reporting for debt and investment transparency as part of a broader governance agenda. The event will be finalized by presentation of the next steps and closing remarks by Daniel Boyce. I would like to highlight the participation of several colleagues from Focal Network in Latin America region, who in their capacity of accountant general in their respective countries, they are also very interested in the topic of this event, and they are participating in this event and willing to promote the relevance of debt reporting and transparency agenda in Latin America and Caribbean region. Please also be aware that all presentations in the final agenda of the workshop are available in the document section of the platform, which you could see on the right side of your screen. Finally, please post any questions you might have during the roundtable discussion using your preferred language directly in the chat. Without further ado, and giving our ambitious agenda, I pass the floor to Dan Boyce, who will introduce our guest of honor. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dimitri. Well, we've all been talking in Pulsar for a few years now about the importance of accrual accounting, and a lot of times what the question is what now that we're adopting accrual accounting in many countries, it's not only how do we adopt it, but it's also what do we do with the information and how can we get more people interested in this information. And I think the debt area is an area where we have a lot of interest. There's no lack of interest, and if we can use the accounting systems of countries to generate better debt information, then there will be credit agencies, investors, government officials, international development agencies like the World Bank who will be interested in this information. And this event today is an effort to bring together some of this information and get this topic on the table for Pulsar so that we can address it more and also consider other programs that we could possibly implement to strengthen this capacity in countries where the World Bank is active. So today we have the director for EFI, our department, which includes not only the governance but also other governance of other global practices, including the macroeconomics unit, which also often takes the lead on debt issues in the World Bank. That's Lalita Morty. She's also my boss, and in a way the boss of everyone here in some way almost. So we welcome Lalita, and we're glad that she could join us today. And we look forward to her comments and also her awareness of these issues as we're addressing them in the governance practice. Thank you, Lalita, and please begin.
Thanks very much, Dan, for that very kind invitation, kind introduction. I'm very delighted to be here today to welcome the government and donor representatives, the global experts, and the World Bank team to this workshop. I think that this workshop is very timely in the current socioeconomic situation, where the world is affected by a shock due to the pandemic, the likes of which we have not seen in our lifetimes. It affects many aspects of our social and economic life, including, of course, on debt, and that's what we are here to talk about today. The pandemic has led to weaker than expected growth, capital outflows, reduced domestic revenues because of lower economic activity, and rising expenditures to help people and firms deal with the pandemic. So the result is that there is a further accumulation of debt. It's not surprising, therefore, that debt levels are rising across the globe, including in ECA. The World Bank has supported its clients to manage their debt both before and after the pandemic through several initiatives. Some of these key initiatives that were launched recently were the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, or the DSSI, the new Sustainable Development Finance Policy that has an incentive-based approach to boost debt management, fiscal sustainability, and debt transparency. And then again, in June of 2020, the World Bank Group specified 5 key principles to improve debt transparency and improve investment flows, which apply to borrowing countries as well as to creditors. Among these principles is the full disclosure of the stock of public and publicly guaranteed debt, SOE liabilities, and debt-like instruments. However, not all countries have adequate capacity to fully disclose their debt. Many clients lack the technical capacity or data to record it and then to report it comprehensively. This lack of capacity affects a country's capacity to address broader debt and investment management issues. It is to this end that the bank's Pulsar team is holding today's workshop. And the objective of this workshop is to better understand and identify what's working and what needs to improve in the region in terms of processes that enable adequate measurement, reporting and disclosure of public debt and investments, and thus contribute to the overall transparency agenda. In preparation to this workshop, the team surveyed 9 regional governments to hear where some of your priorities lie. And the survey responses and preliminary analysis show that many positive steps have been taken regionally. For example, most respondents reported that public debt information is now being disclosed and often online. Many use international accounting and financial statistics standards for public debt and investment projects. Some are reconciling public investment project records with corresponding debt sources. That being said, there are several areas that could use further support. These include the definition and understanding of public debt that vary across countries. International standards are not always applied consistently, and collaboration between different government units and agencies involved in this process could be further enhanced. I think this workshop gives us an opportunity to collectively reflect on how we could work together to overcome these challenges, to hear from global experts, and hopefully signals the beginning of a broader engagement. I look forward to hearing from all of you and to working with you, both through this Pulsar platform, but also through the country level engagement. So good luck. I look forward to hearing what's being discussed here today. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Lalita. Appreciate the comments to get us off to a good start. I think it's now back to Arman.
To me?
Or to Dimitri. Okay, I was wondering when Arman takes over as the MC.
Very soon. Thank you, Lalita. Thank you, Dan. Dorte, we continue with our agenda. The floor is yours. I will be projecting your presentation. Just a few seconds.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, and good morning and good afternoon, everybody. It is a real pleasure to be here, part of this very important and timely Pulsar event. And my presentation, as Lalita just mentioned, focuses on providing an overview on debt transparency. So Dimitri, if you could go to the next slide. So what do we mean by debt transparency? For us, it is the timely, consistent, and comprehensive publication of public and publicly guaranteed debt. This includes the debt of central government, subnational governments, guarantees, and debt of state-owned enterprises, as well as the coverage of all debt instruments, not only standard loans. The challenge with debt transparency is as we move away from the central government, which you can see at the vertical axis, and we go from central government to budgetary funds, social security funds, local government, and SOEs, the coverage of debt reporting tends to decline. The same happens if we move away from standard debt instruments, which are on the horizontal axis here. As we move from D1 to D4, the coverage of reporting tends to decline, and especially instruments that are often underreported are related to guarantees, accounts payable, or non-standard debt instruments, because often these instruments are difficult to capture in recording systems, or they tend to be more prevalent, for example, in state-owned enterprises. Dimitri, now why is debt transparency important? And I go to the next slide. Oops, nope, yes. Debt transparency matters because it is important for government countries to have a full awareness of the entire amount of their debt stock, including also, and that is the companion then, potential fiscal risks, because that will help them make better informed borrowing decisions with respect to the level, the terms, and the composition of debt. Debt management always requires looking at the entire portfolio and having a good understanding about the entire portfolio helps improve decision making. Debt transparency is also important for creditors to take better decisions about their lending decisions in terms of again, the amounts and the terms at which they provide. And we also have seen in several instances that in cases where countries, for example, loans came to the fore, borrowing costs significantly increased. So that transparency can ultimately also help improve investors' relations and help reduce the borrowing costs. That transparency matters, of course, for analysts and rating agencies. And last but not least, it is very important for citizens because transparency helps hold governments accountable. Let me go to the next slide. So for IDA countries, we have established a debt reporting heat map, which monitors and assesses key dimensions of debt transparency. It looks at whether that data is easily accessible. Is it all available on a website? It looks at the instrument coverage. As I mentioned at the outset, complete instrument coverage is very important. It looks at the sectorial coverage, asking whether not only central government debt is covered, but for example, also debt of state-owned enterprises is included. It looks whether detailed information on recent loans is included. The periodicity of the reporting is also important, in particularly for annual reports. According to the debt management performance assessments that we are using, data should not be older than 3 months. And then it looks at additional reports in support of debt transparency, such as the publication of a debt management strategy or the publication of annual borrowing plans. Dimitri, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Now, one aspect is the comprehensiveness of the data, but there are other important dimensions when it comes to that, and I'm sure my colleagues who work on accounting place a lot of importance on this. So one big question is the valuation method. Is that reported in market value, nominal value, and face value? And there is no right or wrong answer. It depends also what is the purpose of the reporting. A debt manager may look at debt from a perspective of portfolio management and debt sustainability, while a statistician may want to choose a different valuation methods for reasons of coherence and consistency. So indicating the valuation method, however, is important so that we know how the statistics have been compiled. Second dimension is important for that is that the reference time is clearly indicated. Accrual accounting, of course, is preferable. In many of the IDA countries, cash accounting is still prevalent, and that poses then challenges in terms of the reporting of arrears. It is also important that the debt report provide a clear indication on how external debt is defined for the purposes of the reporting. Is it the residency criteria? Is it currency? Is it place of issuance? And then there are specific challenges that often are useful to be highlighted in reports. For example, if certain claims are in dispute, or whether when claims have to be restructured, whether the reports represent the pre or the post-restructuring claims. Dimitri, can we go to the next slide? So the last point I wanted to make, and that links to Lalita's comment on the debt transparency principles. Debt transparency is not only about public debt reporting. Transparent and well-defined borrowing practices are very important, such as, for example, a clear legal authorization to borrow, clear mechanisms of accountability, including through budget transparency and audits, and the prudent and transparent use of non-standard debt instruments, such as, for example, collateralized loans. And we just published a couple of months a framework to actually look at how to assess collateralized debt instruments. It is also important, especially in the current context, to be transparent and to disclose information on debt restructuring. Now, talking about the importance of borrowing processes, let me take the examples of audits. In the context of our Debt Management Performance Assessment, or DEMPA, we look at the frequency and the comprehensiveness of financial audits, compliance audits, and performance audits, which look at the effectiveness and the efficiency of government debt management operations, including, for example, internal control systems, etc. We also look at the publication of the external audit reports. Now, we see that in your region, annual financial audits are quite frequent. Regular compliance audits also take place in several countries, and there are several countries who are also undertaking performance audits. At the same time, it is also important to have strong supreme audit entities, and from our side, we are working, for example, very closely with DSSI to train the auditors who perform the debt management audits. Dimitri, can we go to the last slide? Now, the last point, and that I hope segues nicely in what Svetlana is going to present right now, refers to that transparency is not only about putting a nice and glossy and comprehensive public debt report on a webpage. That is important. But it requires, that transparency requires having strong institutions, sound operational processes, and good capacity in place in order to have lasting impact. So on the institutional side, as I mentioned, it is important to have a clear authorization to borrow. We have, I mentioned, audits. On the operational side, strong procedures and processes in place, particularly in the back office. And last but not least, very important, capacity is very critical, especially as we see a continuous innovation in the area of debt instruments. But once all of this is in place, it will help governments and creditors make better decisions and help to ensure that public debt can be put to good use. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Svetlana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to share my screen, and Dmitry, if you could please tell me that you would see the presentation so that I know this, yeah?
Sure.
Do you see it?
It's coming. Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, dear friends and colleagues, good morning and good afternoon. It is really great to be at this workshop, and it's great to see that some old friends from Latin America, from Focal Network, are also joining. So, as you have heard from Lalita and from Dorte, public debt transparency is very important for the decision-making process, for the better management of public finance, and for many other purposes. And one of the ways to support and to improve that transparency is by looking at the processes related to the financial recording, reporting, and disclosure of debt. Because ultimately, to manage debt, we need to have reliable information. We need to know exactly where we stand. And if we don't have the good processes, as Dorte just was referring to, if we don't have strong institutions, it would be very difficult to ensure that we have the right quality of data. So when we were preparing to this workshop, as Lalita said, our objective was not just to raise awareness about this issue, and some of you are very knowledgeable in this area. This is what you do on a daily basis, but we also wanted to identify areas where the World Bank team could effectively work with your countries, where we could really make a difference. So what we decided to do is to approach countries, a few Pulsar countries, and we managed to get responses from 9 countries, and to hear directly from them, to see what practices they follow and what challenges do they see taking place, and how would they like to work with the World Bank. So we have, as I mentioned, we have surveyed 9 countries, and you can see the list of countries on the screen. And we primarily worked with the public debt units or departments within the Ministry of Finance. We had a few blocks of the questions that we have posed, and also I should mention that we have prepared the issue note based on the outcomes of this survey, and this issue note, draft issue note, is already available. We are going to finalize it after this workshop so that you would have this reference. So we had a few blocks of questions where we looked at different parts of the process related to the initiation of that recording, reporting, audit. So first block actually looked at the way you define and understand that. So here, for example, we asked the question, such questions as whether central government is extending guarantees for the public sector entities, or whether central government on lends to the other public sector entities. We also looked at which categories do you include in your respective countries to the definition of public debt. And as you see on these graphs, really the practices vary significantly among the countries. When it comes to the guarantees, most of you extend the central governments extend guarantees to SOEs, some to subnational and local governments, and very few to state-owned banks. When it comes to the different categories, as you see, the 2 most covered categories that are recognized as part of public debt is contingent guarantees and contingent liabilities. So what can we say when we look at the practices, and you will see this throughout survey? What can we say when we see the responses which vary among countries? Well, for us, it means 2 things, really. First is that it would be quite difficult to compare data from country to country. So if you were to look at ECA, Eastern Europe and Central Asia in its totality, it would be difficult to compare countries. And second, you may say that probably governments have different understanding of what constitutes best practice, or perhaps they need to further reflect on what should be the best practice. So the second block of questions focused on the standards. So you all prepare information, financial statistics information and accounting information. So we looked at what standards do you use in both of these areas. And once again, as you can see from these tables, the practices differ. Good news, as Lalita mentioned, is that we have a good coverage of international standards. In fiscal statistics, this is ESA and GFSM, well, 2 versions of GFSM, both 2001 and 2014, and in accounting, it's IPSAS predominantly. However, once again, as you can see, we have a big divergence among countries in terms of which standards you use, and standards are sufficiently different. Even for the GFSM 2001 and 2014 versions are different. So comparing information would be quite difficult. Our third block of questions focused on the processes related to the compilation, recording, and reporting of the debt. So with regards to compilation, we looked at what practices are used by general governments to compile their data, their public sector data. And there was little consistency among the countries. So all respondents reported that the budgetary central government is included. However, the inclusion of other subsectors differed greatly by country. Local governments was the second category, which was most covered, but then I think we provided altogether about 9 options of responses, and the other 6 or 7 categories were spread. We asked the question about recognition of arrears on debt securities and loans, and only 3 countries responded that they include arrears in their public debt records, in their accounting and statistic records. And you can see these 3 countries, it's Republika Srpska, Kosovo, and Tajikistan. We also looked at periodicity of the public debt reports. Here, most of the countries produce accounting reports at least monthly. Republika Srpska reported doing this daily, and Tajikistan does this quarterly. We had one country which did not respond to all questions. This is why you see a bit of a difference. So our next block of questions was, of course, as Dorothy said, we are accountants, we love measurement and valuation. So we looked at the valuation methods used by different respondents. And here, once again, you have this nice table where you can see how you all are quite different in the way you decide to measure and evaluate your debt. Once again, implication is very similar to what I mentioned before. A, it is difficult to compare data among countries, and B, it is questionable whether you all have a consistent understanding of what constitutes the best and recommended practice in this particular area. Finally, we had a few questions which focused on the external audit and disclosure, and this is the area where we saw the most consistency. So most of the respondents, with one exception of Kyrgyz Republic, mentioned that Supreme Audit Institution plays some role in auditing public debt. And 6 of the surveyed countries reported that public debt information was disclosed and published, mainly online and available on request. So our final question included in this survey was open-ended. This is where we directly asked you, please tell us what are the areas and particular challenges where you would like to see the World Bank team more involved in the country level work. And based on your responses, there are clearly 5 focus areas where it seems we could do quite a lot, and where we could structure the country level interventions or do something at the regional level also. So first focus area was related to the enhancement of regulatory framework and methodologies. So this would include such areas as definition of debt, coverage of debt, the methodologies and regulations which are used at the different levels of the government. What we saw in responses is that this is often outdated, incomplete, or just needs to be revised. Second focus area was squarely focused on the consistent application of the accounting and fiscal statistics standards. So here the questions were pretty much, first, what is the best standard to use in the context of a particular country? And second, how to make sure that it is applied in the right scope and in the right way. Third focus area focused on the alignment and reconciliation of public investment and debt data. So one of the objectives of having good information on that is to be able to see how you fund your public investments. And it was mentioned earlier. So in this survey, we did not go in depth into the area of public investments, because by itself it is a very big area. However, we asked whether countries see clearly how their public debt sources are connected and reconciled with the public investment projects that they are supposed to support. And here, once again, the questions were mixed, the responses were mixed, and respondents also said that they would like to have support in strengthening this part of the process. Fourth area, coordination between different units involved in debt and investment recording, reporting, and management. So this is something that we see across many regions. We saw this when we did something similar in Latin America. And here, once again, what we hear from you is that inside your government, different departments need to be able to talk better. And we can help you in establishing the process and language, which will help you to talk to each other. And this is, of course, connected to the fifth area, which is linked to the capacity building of the government personnel. So, and here, of course, one of the questions that was raised is how to make sure that this kind of training is not just provided on ad hoc basis, but that it is a part of the civil service curriculum that the new public servants are getting when they are entering these jobs. And later we will talk that perhaps this fifth area also could be connected to the agenda focused on strengthening institutions. So this is, I think this is the end of my presentation. As mentioned, once again, we have prepared the issue note where we summarize this information, and we will share it with you later. So Dmitry, it goes back to you now.
Thank you very much, Svetlana, for presenting the main results of the survey. For the next hour, I would like to pass the moderation of the session to Arman. Go ahead, Arman.
Thank you, Dmitry. And thanks, Svetlana, for very interesting insights from our country surveys. This session, we're going to hear back from our country participants and to have more insights from them and from experts on how the debt and investment are recorded, reported, and the transparency project. Before moving to the countries, and we are today going to hear from Albania, Armenia, and Kyrgyz Republic, I would like just to ask Avis Rukac, who is representing DEC at the WorldBank. Avis, please share what is the role of the debt statistics in DEC at the bank on this challenging agenda. Avis?
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this roundtable, and this is very timely and very important workshop that during this pandemic time and the call for more transparency of the data. We all know the long history of the bank compiling statistics of public external debt for all IDA and IBRD countries. The bank role on this data has been quite immense. Since 1952, the bank has maintained the data reporting system, which we all know as DRS, which includes historical quantification, methodologies, aggregate debt information. While compiling the statistics of public debt and further the old economy debt nowadays, the DRS takes a comprehensive approach in defining and compiling public debt. It's an obligation of not only central government, but we try to include as much as we can through the information sources for countries and all other data sources that we collect to go beyond central government by covering state, local governments, as well as obligation of any public sector entity in which the government hold 50% share, whether or not the obligation relates to a loan guarantee by the government, as well as any private sector, which is very rare nowadays, that have benefited by the government guarantee. We have continuously striving to improve this coverage, as I mentioned, by increasing the timeliness. The agenda of the transparency in the bank has pushed us to improve the quality, and we have constantly working on setting standards and assisting the countries to better measure debt by better finding the sources to define debt. When the crisis happened, we all know that the data deficiencies and the information gaps regarding the extent of the composition of public debt becomes very obvious, and the absence of late 90s of the crisis in Asia, the bank and the IMF stepped in and led the establishment of the quarterly external debt database, which started in around 2004. This was quite a big step towards the high frequency data that was missing at the time. And similarly, in 2009 crisis, there was a response again from us, from the World Bank, jointly with IMF, to launch the quarterly public debt data. That was started as a voluntary basis for high-income countries, joining also later the low and middle-income countries in 2010. And that was again another effort to fill the the financial data gaps that really created those unpredicted financial crisis in that time, where the data was not pretty clear on the government accounts. And then we all know more recently, the pandemic has been devastating the entire economy, but has highlighted again once more that accurate and transparency data are another theme in this crisis. So we have been working quite intensively to support the call for action by the G20 proposing the debt relief, and we built this debt profile of the countries eligible to this initiative, and by April, May, we started calculating those debt service payments due to 2020 and 2021 in order to have some information and close the gap of what can the potential relief that burdens be during this call for action. So we created this new database, new time series, with all these annual and monthly debt service payments due in order by creditor country, which was the very first time, in order to have a better transparency when it comes to debt forgiveness, debt suspension, potential relief for debt burdens. It's always the transparency when it takes place, where both creditors and debtor have to be very transparent and open to what the debt consists and what is the definition of those payments. Further, the bank has been working closely to maximize the benefits of this information that we capture in order for the bank to have better information, but also for the users, for internal and external users, public, to have a better analysis and most comprehensive data and most detailed and disaggregated data that we can possibly publish and calculate. So in this bank transparency agenda, we have been constantly improving the transparency by disaggregating more information that we get from the countries. Last year, as you know, we have a publication called International Debt Statistics. And last year in this publication, for the first time, we disaggregated further the debtor type of by country, separating government from the public corporation and from the private sector. This year, we went further into disaggregation to have a better transparency for this data and better understanding of what countries are borrowing from and where from and how. So we this year published data with further disaggregation of creditor type and creditor country. Well, we always have been striving to get more and help more to the transparency, and our hope is always to support countries to increase the transparency of the data. And we have been constantly working closer to countries to have a better definition of debt instruments. And of course, when you have data, you can measure better and you can have better policy and lending decisions. So this is pretty much what the bank has been doing and continues doing. We are exploring new areas of debt. So far, the external debt has been quite, elaborated. We are trying to get more into the domestic debt of public sector, which is becoming very important. And we are trying to get first and assess first how much capacity those countries have to compile, based on international standards, all the domestic debt. And then we are looking at and exploring options of collecting this information and unifying and setting some standards of making those data comparable. Thank you.
Thank you. It was very important work which DEC does at the World Bank, and it was very interesting for our participating countries to learn more what is done on the DEC side. So now let's move to our country insights, and I would like to pass the floor to Dritan Fino and Kesiana Halili, who are two department directors for financial reporting and debt management from the Albanian Ministry of Finance. Dritan, the floor is yours. Unmuted, Dritan. Please unmute. Yeah, please.
Thank you everyone. Thank you Arman. Thank you Dimitri. Thank you everyone for having us here in this meeting and for having us to present here. It is a pleasure to join and be part of this important Pulsar meetings. And hope everyone, all their families, is safe and healthy in this difficult situation. I'm going to we're sharing the presentation with my colleague Kesiana, as you presented. Actually, there are three, let's say, three main structures here at the Ministry of Finance in Albania who deal with that data. My department deals with accounting methodology and framework, and their department who compiles the data, and there is also Treasury department who does accounting, recording, and everything else. Regarding the debt data, the general government debt in Albania is comprised of I don't know, Dimitri, are you sharing the presentation or?
Yes, I will share the presentation written, and also if you could talk a little bit louder or closer to the microphone, because the interpreters has difficulties to hear you. I am sharing the presentation now.
Okay.
And Kesiana, please click the request to speak button. So
okay, you hear me better?
Yes, it's good.
Me? Yeah.
Yes, written.
So Dimitri, you have the presentation? Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes. So as I said, there are three main structures in the ministry who deals with that recording and that management. Let's say that data collecting and recording and the methodology. So let's go to slide 3, which gives an information on how the general government data is compiled in Albania. So there are all the debt data is collected from budgetary central government, the central bank, local government, and all non-financial public entities and state-owned enterprises at the central and local level. So these are all the data that are collected and published. But there is no accounting record yet consolidated regarding the public debt. Next slide. Regarding the public debt, the reports and statistics do not include information in relation to contingent liabilities and budgetary arrears. And at the same time, we do report, as for the statistical requirements, we do report based on ESA 2010 regarding the statistical reporting based on ESA 2010, and also, of course, in some regarding some national framework that we have in place. As for the accounting standards, we do have a national accounting framework that is based on modified accrual basis, but the current accounting system that we have, as a matter of fact, does not include data regarding public debt. We have provided we are on a process of transition to accrual accounting, and we have provided we have prepared and issued a transitory guidance, which based on which we do report some data recording arrears on accounting records. So we require all public entities to present in their financial statements information about about the arrears. but that's all the information that we have, and we do not have in the accounting records information about public debt. At the same time, we do have information regarding central government guarantees, which includes guarantees that the central government provides for all state-owned enterprises, for subnational level governments, for other types of government entities, as well as private entities in emergency cases, as the one that we face currently, which the government is guaranteeing all the private entities' borrowings from banks during this pandemic situation. Next slide, please. We do report general information regarding public debt. We do report yearly a medium-term debt management strategy. These are information that are mainly published from the debt department. We do report quarterly a statistical bulletin of public debt. We do report the public debt register, and as I said, we do report also the auctions results of securities, as well as benchmark bonds quotation. And we do report some data as required by IMF standards, which is data based on the General Data Disclosure System, and this information is published quarterly. Another important statistics that is managed by the WorldBank, where we do report all the statistics regarding debt, is the public sector debt statistic, PSDS, which is a system that is managed by, as I said, by WorldBank. At the same time, we do publish information at the Ministry of Finance and Economy website. We do provide information regarding the issues of government securities in the primary market. And of course, we do report on the Parliament regarding a special annual report to the Parliament regarding the all debt data. As for the next slide, please. As for the evaluation method, we do for the statistics purposes, as well as for public for recording purposes, we do report the debt in amortized cost, which means we do report let's say the where the debt is measured at the initial cost minus all the repayments that are done in period. We do have also a system where we record public debt, which is prepared by UNCTAD, the Debt Management and Financial Analysis System, which is used in order to record or report public debt and leak investment management operations. This is a system that is all managed by UNCTAD. Regarding the audit, please go to please next slide. Regarding the audit of the public debt, there are two main structures that audit the public debt, which is the Supreme Audit Institution, of course, and the internal auditors of the Ministry of Finance, but also the internal auditors in the other 9 ministries and the other public entities, which usually take a special focus also on arrears. Usually, we have the Ministry of Finance, and we have issued some instructions to the internal auditors to have a special focus on arrears when they audit their entities. Next slide, please. Regarding the issues that we face in terms of debt transparency, the main issue relates to the lack of clarity and reporting standards, as well as incomplete coverage of all public sector that we have in Albania. For this, we plan several actions to improve in the medium and long term. Next slide, please. So we have planned to improve the medium term strategy which should be better elaborated in accordance with international standards. We plan to strengthen public transparency through collecting and disseminating more debt data, including debt analysis, and promoting the sustainable borrowing practices. A special focus is being placed on the staff capacity in order to staff capacity building, focusing on debt recording, reporting, and management, as well as to strengthen the connection between a fiscal risk management function and debt recording and reporting functions. Next slide, please. At the same time, an important focus would be to standardize the reports that are published and make them more understandable and accessible by the public, as well as by general public, as well as the international community. An important priority for the government is also the implementation of the arrears management system, which should be a wider understanding of government receivables that will support the government efforts to recover funds owed to it in a timely manner. We, as I said also at the beginning, we are also moving to accrual accounting, and we expect by 2022, at best, to start implementing accrual accounting, and we will start also with the standard for borrowing costs. This is based, we have already approved the County Strategic Action Plan, which provides the steps that the government has to undertake in order to implement accrual accounting, and one of these important standards is the standard that relates to the borrowing costs. And we do have already a concrete plan on this in order to follow a few steps to understand the borrowing costs, to review the system that is used to record the borrowing costs, develop and agree the year and accrual repayment estimates of borrowing costs, as well as test the estimates and systems, and implement the process developed and improved for recording borrowing costs. These are what I had to say regarding the transparency of the information, and I'll pass the floor to my colleague Cassiana to provide you more information regarding the data that we publish statistical manner. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to have this presentation today. Thank you, Dritan, for this very detailed summary on the reporting and transparency of public debt in Albania. Please, the next slide on the organizational structure of that department. Yeah, the General Directorate of Public Debt and Foreign Aid Coordination is set up as a designated unit within the Ministry of Finance and Economy. This department takes the lead in all borrowing activities. It promotes development of the domestic market. It's responsible for the preparation of the medium-term debt management strategy with an annual updates on a rolling basis. This department is organized into separate front, middle, and back office functions with a total staff of 25. And it directly reports to one of the Deputy Ministers of Finance and Economy. Next slide, please. As regards to the public debt for performance in Albania, I can say that at the end of 2019, the public debt has fallen to the level of 66.3% in relation to GDP as a result of a gradual reduction of several years. As public finances have been stable since 2015, we managed to reduce the debt level by 6.4 percentage points over a 4-year period. However, the negative consequences of the two major shocks, which was the earthquake in November 2019 and the pandemic situation, have been felt inevitably in the level of public debt during 2020, as well as in the expectations towards the level for the coming years. By the end of 2020, the level of public debt is projected to reach 80.9% in relation to GDP. Meanwhile, our objective is to reduce it starting from next year in 2021, when we plan to public debt in relation to GDP at about 78.6% percentage, and a further decrease in the years to come, reaching it at the level of 76.3% in 2023. Next slide, please, on the public debt structure. Our central government debt portfolio is dominated by domestic debt at 51.08% compared to the 48.9% of the external debt portfolio. In the domestic debt portfolio, over 60% of the weight is held by commercial banks, followed by non-bank financial institutions. Meanwhile, the external debt portfolio is denominated by multinational creditors, 52%, and followed by private creditors, 33%. In 2020, the increased funding needs were covered by domestic markets through the increase of the borrowing in the debt security, and on the international market through the issuance of the Eurobond. Some of the main financing instruments used during 2020 are the Eurobond issuance of 650 million euros in international markets, which I will mention a bit later in the next slide. We received an IMF budgetary support in the amount of 174 million euros. In addition, I have not gone yet to the domestic debt for 2020. I'm still at the slide of public debt structure. In addition, there are two other loans which we are working on, which are budgetary support. It is EU macro financial assistance of euro 180 million in the form of a soft loan with the European Commission, and the WorldBank budgetary support in the amount of $80 million. I would like to mention on the domestic debt that short-term securities are used for the active management of liquidity needs and for the improvement of the annual maturity profile. During 2020, domestic borrowing was carried out in accordance with the plans. In almost all the government auctions for state securities, the demand has exceeded the government needs for funding. Also, even after the measures taken by the government, please in the next slide on the domestic debt. So after all the measures that have been taken by the government in the framework of COVID prevention, the government's capacity to borrow has not deteriorated. On the contrary, as you can see, I mean, all the planned liquidity to be raised in the domestic market has been successfully raised. Also, the interest rates have not been increased even to this difficult situation. The average interest rate in 2019 was 3.84%, and in 2020 the average rate is slightly lower, is 3.71%. Please to the next slide on the Eurobond issuance. We had a very successful issuance in the international market this year with a very high demand. As despite this difficult situation, the amount was 650 million euros and the demand was 4.4 times higher. The next slide, please, on the cost of government debt. As we can see, also through an efficient management of the borrowing process, it has been possible to mitigate the risks and reduce the refinancing risk and reduce also the interest rate risk. We can see a decline due to falling interest rates, both for domestic and external debt. And the last slide, please, on the credit assessment profile. Despite the dual shock of COVID-19 and November 19 earthquake, Albania's rating has remained stable. This was confirmed by Moody's at a rating of B+, and in April 2020, and also followed by Standard & Poor's rating affirmation at B+ stable on July 31st on 2020. So this reflects a favorable macroeconomic prospect for our country, however, highlighting also some room for improvement. Thank you very much.
Arman is reconnecting momentaneously.
Thank you very much, Dritan and Kesiana. Thanks for very informative presentation and on the issues you have shared, particularly on the coordination needed. And you referred at least to the three key players. It's about debt management department, it's about accounting, financial reporting, and treasury in Albanian case, and also on the issues you have been raising, which is about the coverage and the standards, which are also those were very well reflected by Svetlana in those five key areas. and as well as Directorate also refer to the similar challenges. So it means that actually those are the key challenges the country face. So as we talk about the standards, I would like I have a question to Ivona. Which international standard you want to support that reporting in the context of the EU member states or accession and neighboring countries, such as Albania or other Western Balkan countries? Ivona?
Thank you, Arman, for having this discussion on the debt transparency. I would like to emphasize the need of getting good fiscal transparency standards across the world. And actually, EU can be seen as very important agent, catalyst to actually trying to promote such standards in EU countries, but also in countries which are aspiring to join EU in the coming in the future, such as Albania and other countries in Western Balkans. And to this purpose, EU is actually requiring ESA 2010 standards, which are on accrual basis. So this is actually, what is the reason? The reason is actually to ensure uniform and comparable accrual-based information within EU member countries to actually achieve good quality of the data which is used for reporting and comparing the results between various countries. So this should consequently improve budget surveillance and fiscal monitoring at macro level. To enable sound fiscal policy and decision making. According to the EU treaty, member states shall avoid also excessive deficits, and the protocol defines key values, thresholds, 3% for the budget deficit and 60% for debt. This lays out the requirements and the ESA 2010 include specific definitions how these indices should be calculated. But again, ESA 2010 is, as other fiscal statistical framework, is at macro level. So it's in some cases, it's not applicable at micro level, and countries actually need to have some good accrual accounting methodology and standards. Otherwise, they are forced to apply different types of statistical measures and adjustments, which is prone to error. So to this stand, actually, IPSAS is one of the solutions, because these are international standards on accrual basis and allows for comprehensive debt and investment financial reporting. They provide measurement recognition criteria. So this will also application of IPSAS would improve also fiscal reporting, which is so much of the interest and requirements, at least in EU countries. EU some time ago tried to actually assess whatever IPSAS would be suitable standards for application in EU, following application of IFRS, for example, for private sector. And such assessment concluded that IPSAS is the good basis, but EU would like to make their own EPSAS standards. But so far, there are no final product in form of European public sector accounting standards. So far, IPSAS is the only and leading one benchmark for international public sector accounting standards. And since 2012, when EU started to have a discussion about the EPSAS project, IPSAS actually developed several new standards and enhancements. So it's now even more comprehensive set of standards for public sector accounting.
Thank you, Ivona. So we will hear from Ian on the IPSAS side. Thanks a lot about the clarity on the member states side. So it's ESA 2010 and EPSAS, European Public Sector Accounting Standards Project, will also bring it more clarity, and those again reconciled with 5 focus areas presented by Svetlana. Thanks again. Now let's move to Armenia. So I would like just to pass the floor to Artur Ambarchimyan, head of the unit from the Ministry of Finance of Armenia. Artur.
Thank you, Arman, and thanks to the WorldBank team for this opportunity to share with you the Armenian experience on financial reporting and investment transparency. So I am going to share my presentation with you.
To share, Ivona is our senior financial management specialist at the WorldBank. Thanks, Ivona, for your comments. Artur, you can share, please.
Sorry for the moment.
We can move to the Kyrgyz Republic and come back, Artur.
No, just in the share screen, I can't see my presentation, which is open now, but, okay, let me, okay. Okay, could you see it now?
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, I am going to briefly present the country overview, and then I will speak about the debt legal framework, debt statistics, reports, about guarantees and on-lendings, debt scrutiny, and finally I will discuss major issues and actions to improve debt transparency. So Armenia is a small country with 30,000 square kilometers and 3 million population, but on the other hand it has 8 million diaspora. It's parliamentary republic. GDP per capita in 2009 was 4.6 thousand USD. Sovereign ratings currently are Ba3 stable by Moody's and B+ stable by Fitch. Debt management legal framework. The legislation of the Armenia on public debt consists of the law on public debt, law on central bank, as well as there are other legal acts and international treaties. The law on public debt was adopted by National Assembly in 2008. The aim of the law is to ensure effective and public process of public debt management. The law defines the main objective of the government debt management and the purposes for raising public debt. Public debt in Armenia is the aggregation of the government debt and central bank's external debt. Public debt shall be raised by the government, state agencies, state administrative institutions in the name of the Republic of Armenia and by the central bank in its name. The components of the public debt according to the legislation are domestic debt, external debt, and government guarantees. Domestic and external diversification is based on the residency. Article 10 of the law defines that public debt management shall be carried out based on the principles of transparency, accountability, predictability, and publicity. Ministry of Finance and Central Bank shall carry out public debt recording, accounting, and shall be responsible for reliability and the records. Law Central Bank was adopted by the National Assembly in 1996, and the external debt of the Central Bank is taken on behalf and by the Central Bank. So it defines debt management objectives of the Central Bank, which states that the debt management of the Central Bank is carried out in order to implement monetary policy and ensure financial stability. Just in addition, one of the secondary objectives of the central bank is compilation, summary, and publication of public and private external debt statistics. Public sector debt statistics. Government account is cash-based in Armenia and it is relied on GFSM 2001. However, central government debt statistics is based on national framework. Ministry of Finance compiles central government subsector external and domestic debt data, where the main responsible unit is Public Debt Management Department. Local governments have the right to borrow according to the law on local self-governance. But until now, local governments haven't managed to borrow and there is no outstanding debt. General government debt data currently include budgetary central government and extra budgetary central government debt data. It is envisaged in the near future to make amendments in the law on public debt in order to produce the general government debt data by involving also the local government debt, as it states in GFSM 2014. There are no state government and social security fund subsectors in Armenia. As you know, the central bank is a subsector of the public corporation sector. In the calculation of public debt in Armenia, according to the law, only the central bank external debt data are included. Debt data of public non-financial corporations are not embraced in public debt in Armenia. DENFA 6, as well as different Excel spreadsheets, are used for recording central government debt data. There is no interface with Financial Management Information System, as GFMIS system is currently under development. And according to the national legislation, arrears on debt, securities, and loans, including interest not paid within the deadline, should be recognized in statistical records and be included on debt stock. GFSM 2014 states that the accounting records for public sector debt should be consolidated. Currently, the extra budgetary units and local governments don't have any debt, and therefore there hadn't been a need for consolidation for preparing general government debt. There is no need for consolidation also for the central bank debt, as direct or indirect lending or financing by the central bank to the government or other state bodies is prohibited according to the law on central bank. Public debt securities are valued in face value for compiling statistics. However, this year in the annual report to the IMF for GFS yearbook data, debt securities data for 2019 were submitted at nominal value and at market value as well. Public sector debt reports and information disclosure. Public debt statistics compiled records are produced monthly, quarterly, and annually by the Ministry of Finance and published on the Ministry's website. I have to mention that reporting ensured and enhanced transparency and accountability for debt management policy and operations in Armenia. The statistical bulletin on public debt is published monthly and covers domestic and external central government debt and loan guarantees, external debt of central bank, as well as budget loans and sub-loans. It provides information on debt stocks by creditor, by residency, instrument, currency, interest rate basis, and by residual maturity, and as well as debt flows by principal and interest payments, debt ratios and indicators, and basic risk measures of debt portfolio. Quarterly report on public debt is a part of the report on state budget, which presents also information on public debt and current liabilities. We also report to the Parliament yearly basis as the implementation of the state budget, and this report also has a report on public debt. And the next major report is annual report on public debt, which covers domestic and external central government debt, local guarantees, and external debt of central bank. It also provides information on debt stocks and flows, analysis of debt ratios, indicators, and basic risk measures of the debt portfolio. Annual reports are also published in hard copies and are delivered to the beneficiary government and private agencies and institutions, as well as are available for the Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance publishes on its website also other debt reports and information on debt management activities. Central government on lendings and guarantees. The central government provides guarantees for state-owned enterprises, financial institutions, local governments. Government guarantees can be issued based on the positive conclusion of the Ministry of Finance, taking into account the compliance with the public debt management strategy. Budget guarantees can be issued to those resident legal entities who submit justification of the funds needed and project deriving from economic programs of the government. Ministry of Finance has the right to scrutinize the financial situation before repayment of the loan in the cases and in the order envisaged by the Budget Guarantee Agreement. The government external guarantees issued to the central bank is recorded as a debt of central bank according to the law on public debt, and currently the outstanding amount is about 123 million USD. The central government provides on lendings also for SOEs, financial institutions, local governments. On lendings under external borrowings by the government have been mainly provided to the energy sector SOEs. And currently outstanding amount is about 900 million. External credits and loans have been investing through the project implementation units in the following sectors: energy sector, agriculture and irrigation, transport and road construction, education, public sector reforms, water supply, solid waste. So there have also been budget support loans, and currently the total outstanding amount of external loans is 4.6 billion USD. On lendings under domestic borrowings by the government and at the expense of the state budget, own incomes have been mainly provided to companies and financial institutions in order to overcome COVID-19 outbreak, as well as to Armenian nuclear power plant SOE for extension of the life service lifetime. Public sector debt scrutiny and oversight. Audit Chamber of Armenia is responsible for external audit of public debt in Armenia, and the last external audit on public debt was implemented during the fourth quarter in 2019, and the results of external audit were made available to the public. Internal audit is currently outsourced service for the Ministry of Finance, and the internal scrutiny and oversight of the public debt should be fulfilled by the private audit company. And the central government debt records and public investment project records are periodically reconciled with corresponding debt sources, with creditors' records, as well as with the depository records. Measure issues hindering debt transparency and actions to improve it. The measure issues hindering debt transparency in Armenia are, first of all, incomplete coverage of public sector debt by the legislation, in particular local government subsector and public non-financial corporation subsector are not included in public debt reporting. And second, not fully usage of financial and accounting standards. So the following actions that I will name can improve debt transparency: to enhance regulatory framework by adopting comprehensive accounting and reporting standards, policies, methodologies for debt reporting, as well as implementing GFSM 2014 and APSAS, Armenian Public Sector Accounting Standards in Armenia. Then to go on staff capacity building focused on debt recording, reporting, and management. And finally, to implement an adequate IT system supporting debt accounting and reporting. Ministry of Finance currently works on the development of GFMIS system, which will provide integrity of different financial systems and will ensure strengthening of connection between fiscal risk management function and debt recording and reporting functions. Thank you for your interest and attention.
Very much, Arthur. It was very interesting, and it was interesting that you re-emphasize those key elements, which are the regulatory framework, standards, and coverage, capacity of the people, staff, and of course IT and integrated financial management information system as key elements, key issues which need to be tackled, which are also reconciled with 5 focus areas presented by Svetlana. Avis, I would like just to ask you, because we're running out of time, just very brief questions. Based on the insights shared by Arthur, where are the key data deficiencies and information gaps regarding the extent and composition of public debt liabilities you see? Avis?
Yes, I was listening very carefully to the presentations, and it's very clear that the debt management offices have been working very hard to meet all the changes, international borrowing changes over past decade, with new debt instruments, new terms of lending, the continuous shift of traditional sources towards non-traditional lenders, private creditors, commercial bondholders. The entire picture of debt has changed, and there is a lot of progress made by the national authorities, debt management. However, the data collection, compilation, and dissemination still have challenges, and still has not reached the agreed standards, international agreed standards in many borrowers. The data quality needs further improvement, and that depends very much on the various factors, including here establishing debt concepts and definitions, functional debt recording management system, and of course effective organizational structure, which is one of the strengths that it gives the country the capacity to collect this information more closely and make better understanding and better management decisions. The challenges pretty much are across the border. There is a limitation of human resources, expertise on debt, inadequate tools to debt recording, lack of this integration of debt flows and other public financial management systems. What I've noticed through those years where countries report the debt reporting system, there is an underreporting of the borrowing by state, local government, and this is one of the deficiencies across the board. In most instances, any omission of those sectors of the government is not because of an unwillingness to report, rather than, as I mentioned, this financial flows or institutional organization part, where the data does not come in time to the debt management. There are different type of legal framework when it comes to public sector debt definition. So there are also local municipalities that have by law the right to borrow. However, the fiscal weaknesses of these municipalities might create restriction to further borrowing. So the central government steps in, and those are parts of the debt that has not been recorded properly. Practice at the national levels varies really. And there are countries that are pretty much, on top of coverage. However, in most public debt offices, the oversight doesn't extend to non-guaranteed state-owned enterprises. We try to, to capture this gap and this lack of information. One of other things that I want to mention is that, by far the most part of this underreporting is those SOEs, which are not really guaranteed by the government. But on the other hand, there are, parts of debt coverage, debt instrument coverage, that has been quite a challenge for the debt management offices to capture properly and to manage them properly. The quality of the data is always important, and it's always to have a better management, you have to have a better quality of this data to have this management proper. The entire landscape of financing, I suppose these countries to identify new debt instruments And the challenging portion is how to interpret this, how to describe, how to reflect those in the lending instruments in the report, in the publication. How do they, for example, a specific question that is raised recently is how accurately those deposits of foreign official entities at the central banks are reported. The currency swap agreements that represent loans from other central banks to the central banks of the country are recorded. Are they properly defined as debts, and so on and so forth? So those are things that you know, we see all the time in those reporting. There are gaps always in those type of information.
Very good.
Beyond the direct lending from the government, there is a category of contingent liabilities that goes beyond the SOEs. This is a potential risk to the debt portfolio when it comes to public-private partnership, or external liabilities issued through offshores of off-balance sheet mechanism by both public and private domestic entities. Governments are often obligated to guarantee above average income streams to attract the private creditors. However, those are potential liabilities to the government, and some guarantees associated with the PPEs are explicit, are stated in the contractual agreement, but more often there are implicit contingencies that will translate into financial obligations in the future. And when it comes to the financial crisis, we have noticed that, you know, those are measurement problems that sometimes are compounded by the fact that current account practice permits the government to keep the cost and the liabilities associated to those PPP balance sheets. So these are, you know, things that the government are finding it very difficult and challenging towards, you know, measuring the potential risks for, you know, what is the liabilities that comes with it. And as I mentioned earlier, the weak data management procedures sometimes make it very difficult. There are inadequate IT infrastructure for debt recording. There's a lack of integration of debt information flows. There is also the systems spread across the government, and sometimes they're not really talking to each other. So those persistent technical and functional problems create this gap on the data and the quality of the data.
Thank you very much, Avis. Very good points. Thanks a lot. Let's move now to Zhantai. Friends, will be in Russian language, so you can select the language from the floor. I would like Zhantai Tentimizerov из Министерства финансов, руководитель отдела. Zhantai, я передаю вам слово.
Zhantai, the floor is yours. Your microphone is off. Please turn it on.
Unmute делайте, Zhantai, share screen. Мы вас не слышим, просто нужно.
We cannot hear you.
Программы unmute делать.
Can we turn? Come on.
Zhantai, я думаю, мы вас слышим.
Zhantai, can we?
Zhantai?
Please.
Да, мы слышим вас.
We can hear you. Can you hear me? Yes.
Поделитесь просто экраном.
Please share your screen. Okay.
Share screen сделайте, мы презентацию не видим.
Please turn your presentation on. Can you hear it? Can you hear me now? Yes, we can hear you. So, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Happy to greet you. Good morning. What can I say about the situation in Kyrgyz Republic concerning public debt? Just last week, our parliament has approved our draft state budget in the first reading, where main indicators on service of public debt main indicators were approved, and the total amount of debt. So, but before I go into that, I'd like to express my gratitude to the World Bank for all your assistance and for organizing this seminar. We are very grateful that in this very difficult year for our country, especially in the period of pandemic of coronavirus, where we have many cases of COVID-19, our economy has sustained significant blow that impacted negatively socioeconomic life of our nation. Despite all that, as all economic efforts were combined and all social efforts were extended, economic situation in our country is being stabilized. And now we are approving the budget for the next 3 years, 2020 to 2023. At this schedule, at this slide, you can see that external debt will be, the service of the debt will grow, and the peak will come in 2025. So right now, as we consider huge volume of public debt, and it's just general public debt, including bilateral debt, multilateral debt, that's $4.8 billion US dollars. Quite large volume of public debt that creates huge burden on state budget, and our government is forced to cut down expenditures significantly to keep balanced situation with state deficit, budget deficit, but also general economic situation needs to be balanced. So transparency and proper reporting of the budget, not just public debt, are very important. Our three main areas of reporting include the public debt as part of national budget. We are developing national strategy for 3 years, how to manage public debt. And this is going to be a normative act for 3 years. So for next 3 years, we have approved strategy approved by the government, where we set main target indicators that government needs to reach in matters of public debt. What are main reports that are submitted by Ministry of Finance concerning the public debt? One type of reporting is monthly reporting on structure of public debt. It's reported in this format, and every month this report is published at the website of the Ministry of Finance and is used as a basis for reporting to the national government and to national parliament. It includes all bilateral agreements and multilateral agreements and shows the volume of public debt to every creditor. And also, it shows the ratio of public debt to GDP of the nation. And this debt is calculating against nominal value of government securities. It's presented as a general ratio and shows the nominal, but also shows the issues of public securities and amounts repaid when securities are repaid. We have that tracking system, but this system is going through technical difficulties because it's outdated. So we don't have analytical possibilities through this system. It's hard to do proper forecast using that system. So now Ministry of Finance and government as a whole develops new program, DMPS, as early applications. My colleagues from Armenia and Albania said that these nations are using this system to full scale and for quite some time, and it helps managing public debt, as we learn. Talking about the second type of reporting, you can see that on this slide, that's quarterly report provided for the World Bank through National Bank of Kyrgyz Republic. And we see all parameters on internal debt, on external debt, all attracted investment, all service payments divided by multilateral sources of debt, bilateral debt. Also, we have extended information on issuance of securities, volumes, and forecasts. Now, the third report. The World Bank knows it very well. That's DRS report that is presented to the World Bank every year, once a year, based on general report on completion of state budget. It shows extended information on public debt. These are types of reports we compile. I'd like to talk also on transparency. Ministry of Finance has sector, a unit in the ministry that is concerned with transparency of public finance. They develop methodologies and normative documents aimed at increasing transparency of the government, and not just public finance, but budget system as a whole. That's about reporting and transparency. Now, about the total public debt. This information was already mentioned before. This is an initiative of restructuring public debt, extending repayment of debt to other nations as a part of a support in case of pandemic to countries with vulnerable economies. So Kyrgyz Republic, beginning May this year, based on this initiative, has suspended all payments to bilateral creditors. And at this time, we have reached agreements with half of the nations that have borrowed, have lent to us, and they have extended this restructuring. We continue negotiations with Paris Club, but negotiations continue because there are certain conditions for restructuring, and we are negotiating these solutions. And if negotiation continues positively, then we'll have certain saving for the budget. In any case, even if these agreements are not reached, still, the funds that were scheduled for repayment according to these agreements are scheduled in the state budget. So there will be no risk of non-payment. What else I'd like to add on reporting on audit of public debt? In our country, audit is done by a accounting chamber that is subordinate to the national parliament. And just recently, this audit organization, accounting chamber, has done full-scale audit on the budget as a whole and public debt as part of it, as well as we had the audit of the draft budget for the years to come. This report is approved by the government and published by the government in the different media and corresponding websites. That's what I wanted to say on transparency and reporting. Thank you. That's it. Thank you, Zhantai. Thank you.
Actually, I would like to give her a question because she knows very well Kyrgyz Republic and broader SOE agenda. Many presentations we were talking about SOE. So how does that SOE impact the country's debt risk profile? And what can be done to effectively monitor and manage that risk? Natalia?
Yes, hi, can you hear me? Yes,
please
okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Arman. This is a very good question, and I think several speakers have already alluded to the impact of state-owned enterprises on the overall public debt, and including Evis, who explained the mechanics and the impact of the SOE's borrowings on the levels of the public debt. The question of SOE's debt is becoming more acute, especially in crisis times. And in today's reality, during the pandemic reality, it is on top of all governments that we are working with across the whole ECA region. When you look at the SOEs and how they borrow, they can either go through the budget, through the government, and borrow directly from the government, or getting government guarantees for their borrowings. Or oftentimes they borrow directly, independently of the government in the market, and often case when we are not in crisis, they obtain rather favorable terms. However, and as Evis again mentioned, during the crisis times, it is to be expected that the companies would face the financial difficulties. And in cases like this, the government may be expected to come in and bail such entities out, even if their debt is not guaranteed or issued by the government. And there were instances like this, although the governments tried to protect themselves and issue all sorts of risk protection indicating they're not backing up the SOE's individual obligations, but often the public pressure and implicit expectation of the government to come in and cover SOE debts is there. So in working with the public debt, it is important for the governments to actually monitor SOE debt more carefully. And this is what exactly Kyrgyz Republic is doing. By the budget legislation in the Kyrgyz Republic, SOEs are simply prohibited to go and borrow at their own balance sheet risk. Anything that SOEs borrow externally from external borrowers in the Kyrgyz Republic must flow through the government. And this is one of the measures where the government has a good track and understanding of where SOE debt is at any given point in time. So as I mentioned, and many speakers have already alluded to that, but there are actually just 3 things that you can do to improve the tracking and the debt management and debt monitoring of SOEs. So first, you need to keep a good track of SOEs' obligations and borrowings that are connected with the government, either directly obtained from the government or guaranteed, but also those that are done independently of the government at their own balance sheet risk. B, the governments would need to keep a good track that is based on the quality accounting data. And this is where we always preach to have and look into IFRS audited financial statements. And here there are 2 keywords, IFRS and audited, to be sure that the data that the government is looking at is a quality data. And third thing that we are yet to see emerging is proactively manage that risk. So not only monitor SOEs compliant with their debt obligations, but also proactively work with the SOEs and impacting their financial performance and proactively overseeing their activities to avoid or reduce the risk of them failing the obligations. This is it. I hope I have answered.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Natalia. And we will keep those 3 elements in mind because these are very well shapes what needs to be done on SOE side. As before passing back to Dmitry, and we are running out, actually, we're just exceeding our session a bit. I would like just to use this opportunity because we have, as you know, this event is also supported by Pulsar program, and Pulsar is a donor-funded activity which is funded by the Swiss SECO and Austrian Ministry of Finance. And we have a Ministry of Finance representatives who joined us today, and I would like to pass the floor to Agnes Rimmel, advisor from Sustainable Development and Finance of the Austrian Federal Ministry of Finance. Agnes, can you please just quick request to speak button? Yes, you are there. So my question to you is how the Austrian Federal Ministry of Finance see the role of the financial reporting for debt and investment transparency. Agnes?
Yes, thank you, Arman, and thank you everyone for the interesting input in this indeed very timely session. Especially the country presentations have been very interesting to listen to, so this is greatly appreciated that we are convening here. So being mindful of time, just very briefly, maybe from our side, well, without any doubt, financial reporting is, of course, a topic that is of great importance also to the Austrian Ministry of Finance, as it plays a key role to facilitate transparency as regards public debt management and investment, and also to contribute to accountability and efficiency in this respect. So we actually broadly echo what was already mentioned by many speakers in this session, that by adhering to international financial reporting standards, financial reporting is in fact key to facilitate transparency by enhancing both the quality and also the comparability of financial information being done with increasingly coherent data on debt and investment in general. And transparency, especially in the public sphere, further contributes to accountability by, on the one hand, helping governments to demonstrate and also reason for the use of public funds, and for that matter, also to stakeholders and citizens to duly evaluate this publicly available information. And also, last but not least, financial reporting has the potential to increase efficiency, also by helping government officials, also again in the public sphere, to take better informed decisions about resource utilization, and ultimately to contribute to fiscal sustainability. Hence, and especially in current circumstances, debt and investment transparency is essential to deal with rising government financial liabilities, and also to attempt reversing capital outflows that countries are dealing with in a way that is adequate and also justifiable and financially or fiscally sustainable. So it is very clear to us that advancing the financial management agenda in general and the financial reporting agenda in particular remains imperative, not only on our end, but also concerning our engagement with the bank to support client countries in this respect. So let me close by saying that we do look forward to continuing our long-standing cooperation with the bank in this field, that is with the Center for Financial Reporting Reform mainly, and also programs such as Pulsar, as Arman mentioned, on public sector accounting and reporting in Europe and Central Asia, in order to facilitate in the end exchange, share lessons learned, and facilitate sustainable environments to further improve and harmonize financial reporting frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and thank you to you personally and to the Ministry of Finance, Federal Ministry of Finance of Austria, for your support of CFRR and our Pulsar program. And thanks to all the presenters, speakers for sharing, and experts for sharing your views and insights. As we talk about standards now, it's the time to move back to Dmitry, and I can see Ian already connected. Dmitry, back to you.
Thank you, Arman. Thank you all colleagues for this enlightening session. Jan, it's good to see you as always. Please go ahead with your presentation, as we are already running a little bit late as always.
Okay. Okay, so thank you, Dmitry. Can you just confirm you can see my presentation okay?
No, we can't see it.
Oh, okay, hang on.
Let me know if you need any assistance.
Not sure why it's not coming up, actually.
Let me do it for you, if it's okay.
Yep, okay, that's good. Okay, sorry, I can't see the slides at the moment. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Jan, go ahead.
Okay, so you're on the first slide at the moment, because I can't see this, so okay, so thanks everyone for letting me join today. I joined straight from the IPSASB meeting, which started today. It's very good to be able to join and certainly to listen to a very interesting discussion. So in terms of the presentation, just Dmitry, if you can move on to the second slide, please. Okay, so you should have a slide which says...
Jan, try to change the screen you see in your right, sorry,
yep.
left right corner, move to the presentation. Choose the presentation mode instead of leave video.
Hang on.
Left upper corner.
Hang on. Ah, okay, that might help me.
Can you see now the presentation?
Yeah, for some reason it's not. Let me just. I've just got live video and it won't click on the presentation. I mean, I've got hard copy in front of me, so if you can tell me the title of the slide you've got, I can present to that, okay?
We are in the slide of overview of IPSAS.
Okay, that's good. So if you can just click to make sure that all the lines have appeared on that, so you're down to 1/3 of IPSAS at the bottom bullet point. Okay, so just some background to get us on the same page in terms of international public sector accounting standards. And these are standards for reporting by public sector entities. So it's interesting in terms of how that fits with the discussion that we just had about state-owned enterprises. I'll come on to that, but it's certainly very relevant, and it was good to see the colleague from the government of Austria, because Austria is one of the IPSAS adopters. And the standards are about quality, comparability of data, transparency of data. So although we do have a cash basis IPSAS, the primary standard is the primary standards are the 37 accrual IPSAS, and those deal with the basic areas that you expect in terms of when you recognize a transaction or a balance, how you measure it, and how you actually present it. Now, the important thing in terms of the conversation that we've just been having is that where it's appropriate, IPSAS use the private sector IFRS as the basis for the standards. Very firmly, the board believes that if a transaction is the same in the public and the private sector, that it should be accounted for in the same way. Where there is, we change terminology for the public sector context, we may well provide different examples, but it's only where there is a topic that's completely different, such as taxation. That's the case where we will develop a new standard. And as you'll see from a dashboard that we publish regularly, at the moment, around about a third of IPSAS are wholly or mainly public sector specific. Now, the links with IFRS, I think, are very important, just considering the discussion that we've had about state-owned enterprises, because IPSAS 35 on consolidation takes the equivalent principles from IFRS and applies them to the public sector. So prima facie, you would expect state-owned enterprises to be consolidated into government financial statements. And it's also very important the way in which we use those standards, because the relevant IPSAS start with IFRS, there should be no problem of consolidating IFRS-based information into IPSAS-based consolidated financial statements. And the only practical areas that might come through are where different choices are made by the state-owned enterprise. If you want further information on that, go to the IPSASB website. There is a staff Q&A there that covers specifically that aspect. So Dimitri, if you can move us on to the next slide, please. And you have one headed IPSASB Financial Instruments Guidance. So the reason for putting this in was just to give you the background to how we've got to where we are. Basically, in terms of our projects, the original project going back a number of years was based on the old version of IFRS, and that resulted in 3 standards aligned with IFRS, IPSAS 28 to 30. Recently, we've updated those standards to bring in IFRS 9. At the time we did the original project, there were a number of areas specific to the public sector which which required more detailed analysis, and we didn't have the time to actually bring those in at that point. Therefore, we included those in a separate project on public sector specific financial instruments, and I'll identify what that covered shortly. So in terms of the main update, Dimitri, if you can move us on to the next slide, please. This was initiated in 2016, the first year in which I became chairman of the IPSAS board. It was an alignment project, so one where we start with the IFRS, and it was bringing in the new IFRS 9 requirements. Now, very importantly, for the public sector, that brought in the expected credit loss model. It also brought in the hedging requirements. And those were very important from a board perspective, because essentially what they were doing, as it did in the private sector, was it aligned the financial reporting guidance much more closely with the way in which people were actually managing their financial instruments. We brought over the additional guidance for the public sector that we had originally included, particularly in IPSAS 29, we brought that over, and the new standard was approved and published in 2018. The extended date, though, for the standard has recently been extended to recognise the impact of COVID-19, but you can still adopt that earlier. And indeed, I was on at a meeting last week where the European Commission, who use IPSAS as the basis for their standards, are looking at bringing in accounting for financial instruments IPSAS 41 in from the 1st of January for the European Commission. So if you move us on to the next slide, Dimitri, public sector specific financial instruments. What this shows is how we've dealt with the special public sector topics where we saw additional guidance being needed. So we provided additional guidance on concessionary loans when we originally looked at financial instruments back in the standard that was published in 2009. We also included there the impact of financial guarantees. When we updated that standard for IPSAS 41, that guidance came over, but we also added some additional guidance on securitizations. And that left us with the 4 topics identified at the bottom of that slide: monetary gold, special drawing rights and IMF quota subscriptions, and currency in circulation. And the question we had was ascertaining more about the economic substance of those transactions, and also whether that would fit within the context of IPSAS 41. Essentially, are they financial instruments or not? Now, with a lot of detailed analysis in it, you know, the SDRs and the quota subscriptions for the IMF actually are quite technical. There's a lot of debate backwards and forwards. We concluded that actually those transactions could be accounted for as financial instruments. So we've included implementation guidance recently in IPSAS 41 to that effect, but we're saying that essentially you can use that existing guidance. Similarly, currency in circulation can, depending on the legislation, be a financial instrument. So again, we've updated that, and this is this guidance on public sector specific financial instruments was approved by the board at its September meeting. It will be published shortly. The final area was monetary gold, and this we concluded actually wasn't a financial instrument in the strict sense of the term, but in the end we concluded that the characteristics would be such that by analogy you could account for it in the same way as for financial instruments. So we've included implementation guidance on that in the new standard. So IPSAS 41 will cover all of those, and it is essentially very strongly aligned with IFRS 9, so no problems consolidating public sector entities, debt management offices and so on with the data that you would collect from state-owned enterprises, which ideally should be, as has been said earlier, should be accounting on an IFRS basis. If we move on then, just to underline some of the advantages of using IPSAS compared with the statistics frameworks, and essentially, so Dimitri, we should be on the debt support and restructuring slide. The key thing there is that the expected credit loss model, that's not something that is in the national statistics measures. That really actually reports debt write-downs where you actually have a write-down at that point. It's not earlier. And that's clearly quite an important additional piece of information, that expected credit loss. Similarly, subsidies, the economic impact of that rather than the nominal value reported. And you'll see the impact where you have a debt rescheduling. Because you're on nominal value, that will tend not to come through in terms of the normal debt statistics. If you want to have a look at in more detail at those issues, I've given a reference there to the staff question and answer sheet, which specifically covers that. Now I want to just move on and cover a couple of final issues which really bring us up to date, just in terms of recognizing the impact of COVID-19. So Dimitri, if you can move us on to the slide on the staff Q&A on COVID-19. This was something that we produced back in April this year, and really what we did was we looked at the existing guidance that we had within the IPSAS suite and said, okay, to what extent does this address the impacts of the interventions that governments are making at the moment? And in most cases, actually, you can use our existing standards. The suite will cover that. So whether that's direct government expenditure, support for individuals, or support for the financial systems, and essentially in particular issues around guarantees, impact of debt rescheduling, and so on. So you can find that guidance again in the form of a staff question and answer on our website that directs you to the relevant standards covering those particular topic areas. Final thing that I'd just like to draw to your attention before I close my presentation is on the next slide, the COVID-19 intervention assessment tool. And this was something that we developed again during the second quarter of this year, really to address the issue that what do you do if governments aren't yet on accrual reporting and IPSAS? We were challenged by the then Department for International Development to say, can we do something for governments either on the journey to accrual or not yet, or not even having started? So it's a very high level tool. It's spreadsheet based, but it gets you to think through the transactions and then think them through in the context of the IPSASB guidance. So you can use it when you're designing new interventions to assess the impact, particularly on debt, if you like, in the current the context of the current seminar, and you won't get the overall, the full position that you would get if you'd adopted accrual, but you will still get an idea of the incremental impact. The idea is that it should support thinking about not just cash transfers as the automatic reaction to sort of the pandemic, but also think about use of guarantees, debt rescheduling, and so on. And the important thing is you can use it at any point in time. So there's a companion document that talks about the transition to accrual and how it interfaces with that. So again, and there may be a piece of animation, so if you can click again, Dimitri, there is a web reference that I've given, and I think that's all I'm going to cover in terms of today's presentation, but I hope that's given you the message that the guidance is there and available on financial instruments in the public sector context. It does address the specificities of the public sector, and it will be compatible, the IPSAS guidance will be compatible with IFRS, so that you can consolidate in state-owned enterprises that are using IFRS. And I think with that, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. Robbie, if you are with us and you could request to speak. Great. The floor is yours, Robbie. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. So good to be here with you today. Thank you for having me in this event, this workshop. I was able to listen to part of the conversation, and I'm very excited about this agenda. For somebody who is not an expert on these particular issues, it's incredibly important to see all the connections that this agenda on debt transparency and public investment transparency, all the connections that this has with the broader agenda for governance, not just in ECA, but in every country in the world. So let me share with you maybe 5 thoughts that I wanted to put on the table today for your consideration. The first one is that while transparency is always important in terms of both debt transparency and public investment transparency, today is not only important, today this is also urgent. because of the days in which we are living today. Ian made some reference to this at the end of his presentation, but let me explain why I say this, because it relates to the COVID situation, but not only to the COVID situation. Number one, it is impossible to have accountability in society without transparency. So transparency is a fundamental, critical element for the accountability agenda. Related to this, it is impossible to have good governance in society without having accountable institutions. That is why we at the World Bank define the good governance agenda for the ECA region, for Europe and Central Asia, as an agenda that has to do with building effective institutions, inclusive institutions, but also accountable institutions. So transparency is important for accountability. Accountability is important for good governance. Today's is more important than before. Also, Ian referred to the COVID situation because of the massive investments that governments and expenditures that governments are making today because of the crisis. But it also has to do with trust in public institutions. When there is no transparency, citizens, agents in the private sector, government officials themselves tend to trust less public institutions in society. And trust is at the center of the good governance agenda today. It is at the center of how we fight, for example, a crisis like the pandemic we have. Just to give you a very concrete example. If you don't trust as a citizen that the vaccine that your government is proposing you to put in your kids' arms or your own body is not reliable, is not effective, you may not do it. And as we know, vaccination works better when everybody does it. And we don't leave anybody outside of the vaccination system. That's just one example of why trust is so important in society. And without transparency, trust is very, very important in society. It's very difficult in society to exist. Number two, is that transparency on debt and transparency on public investment has tangible results, has impacts. Of course, for many of us, most of us, I like to believe, transparency is important by itself. It's a value that we want to defend. But beyond that, it has also pragmatic, tangible implications for the way that governments operate. Let me give you just a few examples of this. Transparency and systems for transparency on debt and public investment are taken today by international credit rating agencies. Let me translate this to you. International rating agencies, credit rating agencies, are the ones who, in a way, define what is the spread, how much of a risk a country has when they borrow in the markets. So if these agencies decide that you are riskier, you have to go to the market and pay higher interests. Well, let me tell you, transparency today is one of the elements that they use when assessing the risk in individual countries. So if you want to pay fewer interest in the market, you become more transparent. Number two, transparency is taken by national governments when they need to define, for example, transfers of funds to subnational entities, local governments in federal countries to regional governments. So it also has an implication in which the governments internal to a country operate among themselves. So if you want, to get money from your national governments, you better be more transparent as well. Number three, transparency today is included in almost every assessment instrument that we have in international cooperation. So we use this in the instruments that we manage at the World Bank. The PIFA assessment is one of them. The public investment management assessment is another one of them. So, again, you want to score well in these assessments done by international agencies, you better become more transparent. Fourth, transparency is valued by citizens. They want to see what is the final destination of their own resources. Remember, government's money is not government's money, it's the public's money. And the public wants to know what happens with the resources that they give to governments or governments borrow in their own names. We are supporting today an interesting platform in Croatia, for example, It's a platform to monitor the use of public funds on the COVID crisis. So, doing this together with civil society organizations and the Ministry of Finance, we are about to start similar exercises in 3 countries in the Western Balkans. And finally, on this point of, the instrumental use of transparency, believe it or not, government officials in different agencies benefit from transparency. This is, when I'm saying this, I remember an interesting example of one of my work many years ago in Mexico. Dimitri was there at that time. And we were supporting the federal government, the national government, with the implementation of the transparency law. And it was implemented, there was a system in place of requests for information, and as soon as this started to happen, together with this Agency for Information Transparency, we started to monitor who is asking for information. And it was very, very interesting to see that, of course, journalists, they were on the top of the list, and very close to that were government officials asking for information. And why is that? That is because in many governments, information does not flow. But when there is transparency, other agencies, other levels of governments, other branches of power benefit from that transparency as well, because it's much easier to get this information. Third message, transparency is not enough. I know that today the event is about transparency. We are discussing a lot of this, how to make it happen, what instruments we can use, what are the standards for this. But transparency is not enough. For transparency to work, we need also quality of data. And, many of you, I'm from Argentina myself, many of you may like football or soccer, as they call it in the US. And if you wanted before, the weekend to have some, prediction about your own team and how is your own team going to score in the match during the weekend, maybe one way to do it is to wait until Monday, newspaper, and see what happened. You will find there that the information is reliable. That my own team, Boca Juniors, won 1-0. The information is sustainable because I get this information about what happened during the previous weekend, but this information is not timely if what I wanted to do was to anticipate what happened with the match. These are the things we want to make sure that every system has. For information to have good data, the data needs to be reliable, it has to be certain, it has to be timely, it has to be produced when you need it, not 2 years later, and it has to be built on systems that are sustainable over time. Fourth message is that, related to the topic of transparency not being enough, we need to connect transparency systems to the broader accountability systems that exist in the country. Transparency needs to be consequential. The only way to make transparency consequential is by connecting these to accountability systems that exist. These accountability systems may be the supreme audit institutions in the country, maybe special commissions in parliament, it may be special committees in the executive branch, it may be sometimes information that the judiciary needs to use. But basically, if transparency is not connected to accountability systems, what you can have at the end is a sense of impunity. In one of the countries where I worked, people told me, we don't have an issue of transparency. We know exactly who is corrupt in this country and who is stealing the money. So it's not an issue of transparency, it's an issue of impunity. So connecting transparency to accountability and to the accountability systems is very, very important. Finally, all of what I said is probably very nice, it sounds very nice, and the question that many people have in their minds is, how do we do this? And today, I think it was a very good example of finding specific solutions on how to build these systems. Let me maybe share with you very quickly the 5 priorities that we see when governments are working on this, and Every government is working on this to some extent. Some are much more advanced than others, but everyone is engaged on this. Number one is the need for enhancing and clarifying the regulatory framework and methodologies for this. So this does not become an ad hoc exercise every time that administrations change. Number two, the need for a consistent application of international public sector accounting and fiscal statistics standards. Ian just referred to the IPSAS, for example. Very, very important, because then you make not only more sustainable systems, but also the information to be more comparable across countries as well. Number three, the need for having an alignment and reconciliation of public investment and debt data. These two need to talk to each other. Number four, the need for strengthening coordination, including the interfacing between systems. In many countries, what we see is not that there is no information, it's a lot of systems, and these systems, as the technical people say, don't talk to each other. So how do we coordinate across these systems, especially when it comes to public investment management and the relationship between public investment management and public debt as well. And finally, you can have all of these put in place, but you need to build the necessary capacity in government personnel. Otherwise, none of this becomes effective. So let me finish by thanking all of you for participating in this session, for giving me the chance to share some of my ideas on this, to re-emphasize how important this agenda of transparency in public investment and debt is so important for the broader governance agenda in the countries where we work. And I look forward to further engagements on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robbie, for sharing these insights. Dan, back to you for the closing remarks.
Very good. Thanks again, Dimitri. Well, I'd like to, first of all, thank everybody for attending the workshop. We can't see everyone on the screen, but in addition to the speakers, we know we've had the Pulsar members from the Europe and Central Asia region, as well as government officials connected with FOCAL from Latin America and the Caribbean region. I also wanted to mention the participation of the donors. We heard from Agnes Drimmel as well. We know Elizabeth Gruber and Thomas Bernhard were planning to connect from government of Austria, and Thomas Stauffer as well from the Swiss government, and SECO, who have all been supporting Pulsar since it's started. I've also heard from World Bank experts from different departments, as well as Ian as an external expert, Ian Carruthers from IPSASB, and we thank all of you for making this really a comprehensive program. I think the agenda's importance has been spelled out by many of the speakers, and we want to build on this, and so what I'm going to just mention is a few other points and some next steps that we might consider as we go ahead. I think there's clearly a lot to be done in this area: financial reporting, debt transparency, and all of the related areas that we've heard about from the different speakers, including the three country speakers. We also have the survey results, which help us to identify really some of the priority areas, and at the same time some of the areas where countries are more advanced, and other areas where there might be need for capacity building or other types of technical assistance and support to do some of the things that Robbie referred to, the kind of 5 areas that Svetlana also had mentioned. And these areas may evolve as we continue working on these things, but regulatory framework, the accrual accounting and IPSAS, which is what Pulsar and FOCAL are all about, really, and then public investment and debt data, the data issue being so important, as we've heard from different parts of the World Bank, in addition to many of you. And the coordination on the systems, we heard from Armenia, for example, that they don't really link the debt system to the FMIS. It's still evolving FMIS, so you know, in most countries FMIS is constantly being renewed, and we have opportunities to incorporate debt as well as many other parts of public financial management when we're doing that. And then capacity building, which comes into play so much, and it's one of the areas that the World Bank is more likely to be involved in supporting. And it's really what Pulsar is all about, although the capacity building is more in terms of peer learning rather than direct support, although we do have the One Country program in Albania that's directly supporting the implementation of accrual accounting. So I just like to conclude by emphasizing this workshop is really the beginning of a broader operational engagement that we can see from the World Bank side involving our other partners. We have the Pulsar team as well as the broader ECTA governance team that Robbie and I are leading in the World Bank. We'll be looking more closely at the information in the surveys and especially in some of the areas that you as the country representatives have reported as where you would need World Bank support or support from other donors and other partners. I think this could be a country level where we already may be doing some work, but where we can do more, especially in the accounting side, to support countries with technical assistance. And we're also looking at more regional level type activities like this event today, and possibly even a technical assistance program that could possibly go across more than one country. So we could take advantage of the expertise and bring it into more than one country. I think this is coming from the top of the World Bank. Really, the president, David Malpass, has emphasized this debt transparency issue maybe more than any other issue. Of course, COVID has also become the top priority, but debt transparency, sustainability has been an area that has been really newly emphasized in the World Bank only in the last 2 years or so. So with that, we look forward to continuing to engage, and I thank all of you for joining us today, and pass the mic once more back to Dimitri to close the event.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. We are looking forward to continue this dialogue, as Dan mentioned, in the next few months, and we hope to see you again in our future Pulsar events. Please stay safe and have a great rest of the day.